Abraham Lincoln, 16th President. Abraham Lincoln was born near Hodgenville, Kentucky on February 12, 1809, in a log cabin. When he was born, there were only 17 states. Other regions were called territories. When Abraham was 2, his family moved to Knob Creek, which was 10 miles away. When he was old enough, Abraham often helped his father, mostly on the farm. He usually wore a raccoon cap and a buckskin shirt and pants. He went barefoot most of the year. When it got too cold, Abraham wore leather moccasins. He was a tall, skinny, big-eared boy who grew up quickly. His pants were usually several inches above his ankles. In those days, there were few schools. Being unable to read or write was not unusual. Thomas Lincoln didn't believe in education. Sometimes he let his children go to school for a short while. Sarah held her little brother's hand as they walked 2 miles to a log cabin with a dirt floor. Their school was called a black school because the students said their lessons out loud. The teacher had a book or two, but these were the only books in the classroom. After the teacher taught a lesson, the children repeated it back. The classroom was very, very noisy. In spite of this, Abraham learned to read. He enjoyed reading books and poetry the rest of his life. After planting and harvesting time came, the classroom emptied out. The children were in the fields working. The Lincoln family's cabin was within sight of the Cumberland Trail. Life on Knob Creek was often lonely, but visitors sometimes stopped to chat. All kinds of travelers often passed by. Everyone liked to listen to Thomas Lincoln, who was a born storyteller. Abraham sat nearby, quietly taking in every word his father said. Later, he'd practice telling the stories to himself. Then he'd try them on his friends. Like his father, Abraham became a skilled storyteller. People loved to listen to him. This skill often came in very handy when he grew up and made speeches. When Abraham was 7, his father decided to make a fresh start somewhere else. Problems had arisen with the ownership of his property. Thomas left to find land in the state of Indiana. Another reason for the move was that Kentucky was a slave state and Indiana was a free state. The Lincoln family did not like slavery. When Tom got back, the family packed up. They were going to a settlement called Pigeon Creek. On December 1816, the Lincoln family traveled 60 miles to the Ohio River. There they loaded their things and traveled into Indiana. When they reached land, they went 16 miles through the woods to reach their new home. Tom and Abraham built a 3-sided shelter. Rain and snow came in through the front, which was only covered by animal skins. They kept the fire burning day and night. The family settled down to wait for spring. Bears, raccoons, deer, and other wild animals roamed the woods around the camp. The children had to walk a mile to get water from a creek. When spring arrived, Tom began building a cabin. After he finished, he began clearing land for the crops. That fall, Nancy's cousins, Thomas and Betsy Sparrow, came with Dennis Hanks. The Sparrows and Dennis moved into the old shelter. Spring and summer passed without problems. In the fall, a disease called milk sickness struck the family. Back then, people knew that milk caused a sickness, but no one knew why. Today, we know that if a cow eats a plant called white snake root, a poison gets in the milk. First, the sparrows got sick and died. 2 weeks later, Nancy got sick and died. The children built a coffin and buried her on a hill next to where the sparrows lived. After Nancy died, the family needed a mother. Candles and soap began to run out. Clothes became ragged and dirty. Sarah did what she could, but she was only a child. Tom went back to Kentucky to find another wife. Now the children were alone. Attracted by the pigs the family kept, panthers prowled around the farm at night. Inside the cabin, the children huddled together under ragged blankets. When Tom had returned, he brought a new wife named Sarah, who also brought her 3 children with her. Abraham went to school when he could. He walked 4.5 miles each way. It would take about an hour each way. Abraham said he got his education by littles. In all, he never had more than about a year of school. Abraham loved to read, but most people never had any books. If he was lucky enough to find a book, he carried it everywhere he went. Once rain ruined a book Abraham had borrowed. He had to work for the owner for 3 days to pay it back. At 17, Abraham was 6 feet 4 inches tall. He was thin but very strong. People claimed he could drive an axe deeper into a log than anyone. Dennis said that hearing Abraham work was like hearing 3 men work at once. Soon the family moved to Illinois. The parents stayed there for the rest of their lives. Abraham was now 22. It was time to make his own way in the world. He headed to the city of New Salem, Illinois. When he was 40, Abraham thought of an invention that made boats lighter when they got stuck. He carved a model boat to show how this would work. Abraham got a patent for his invention. Abraham Lincoln was the only president to ever have a patent. Abraham didn't give up his studies. Once he heard that a farmer named John Vance had a grammar book. He walked 6 miles to borrow it. Abraham was friends with a teacher named Mentor Graham. Mentor helped Abraham with grammar and spelling, and they read poems together. One day, Abraham met a lawyer named John Todd Stewart. John told him he should be a lawyer. He liked the idea. He would study on borrowed law books whenever he had time. Abraham was still interested in serving in the government. In 1834, Abraham won election to the Illinois General Assembly. He got a new suit and headed toward the state capital, Vandalia. Almost 2 years later, he left for Springfield, Illinois, about 20 miles away. Now he wanted to try to be a lawyer. Abraham had almost no money and no shelter. Abraham met Joshua Speed, who offered him a place to stay. Abraham met Mary Todd at a dance, and soon they were married in 1842. They had 4 sons named Robert, Edward, William, and Thomas. Thomas was nicknamed Tad, and William became Willie. In 1846, Abraham ran for the U.S. House of Representatives. He won the election and the whole family moved to Washington, D.C. After his term ended, he returned to Springfield. Abraham ran for the election again in 1858. This time it was for the U.S. Senate. He lost, but he tried again in 1860 and won. Lincoln faced a problem. The South had slavery and they didn't think they were being treated fairly. Things became so bad that the South started to leave the USA. South Carolina was the first to secede, then Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas. After that, Virginia, Arkansas, North Carolina, and Tennessee. On April 12, 1861, the first shot of the Civil War was heard at Fort Sumter, South Carolina, when Southern soldiers fired cannons at Northern soldiers on duty there. The Civil War had begun. The Civil War lasted 4 years. In September 1862, the president warned the South that if they didn't join the United States within 100 days, he would set their slaves free, and he did. The order was called the Emancipation Proclamation. In July 1863, the bloodiest war took place in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. The North won. The president gave a speech at the battlefield. It only lasted 2 minutes. His speech is called the Gettysburg Address. In 1864, the president picked General Ulysses to lead the Union. Robert E. Lee, the General of the South, surrendered to him on April 9, 1865. On Friday, April 14, 1865, President and Mrs. Lincoln went to a play at Ford's Theater. They were upstairs in the president's special box. During the play, a man came in and shot President Lincoln. The man escaped but was later caught and killed. Abraham died at 7:22 the next morning. He placed his coffin on a train and it traveled through 7 states. People were standing by to honor the president. Today we still honor Abraham Lincoln. Every February we celebrate his birthday on President's Day.